let's zoom in this time a little bit to England and to Dr. Carmel Kent, who is head of educational data science at Educate. And she's right now working on an ongoing research about the effects of COVID on education in England. And it's joined Educate Ventures, Cambridge University Press, and UCL Knowledge Lab. So Carmel, and please let us know what we should have in mind, taking into consideration that it's December 2020, and there are many things that we have to learn still from, and many conclusions that we have to take from this.
Absolutely, and we are continuing learning as we go. Can you see my screen? Is that okay?
Yes, it's perfect.
Great. Okay, so I'll take you back to March 2020. Sorry for that. I know none of us really want to go back there. But yeah, COVID-19 shook education systems across the globe. And we already know that the implications on education were both terrible and transformational, or at least potentially transformational, which is one of the perspectives we are looking into. In the UK, as well as actually anywhere, the COVID has surfaced many existing structural barriers and already existing inequalities. So just before we started the session, Carla told us about all kind of other existing structural barrier, like the gaps between the startups culture and universities culture. So there's all kind of gaps that were already there before COVID, but COVID has definitely surfaced it up. It has catalyzed the sort of technology used in education that would normally take many months or even years. So no doubt it was a major disruption. And for us researchers, it was a rare opportunity to observe, to collect evidence, and to learn. So at Educate, we've started collecting data right away. We still are collecting data. And our overarching aim is to map the main challenges, the main opportunities, the kind of support systems and uses of different uses of educational technologies in the school system. So K-12 since spring 2020. So we are compiling now an ongoing report. The first launch would be at the beginning of January, but we are ongoingly collecting more and more data and evidence to maintain it. As Milena said, it's an ongoing thing, and we need to collect more evidence and make sure that we are learning all the time. And what I thought that today I will mention just some of our findings, maybe some that could be mostly relevant to the group here. But of course, if you want to get any more details, I'm inviting all of you to have a look at our full report, which is very, very long, but we will also have some summaries and visualizations to make it more consumable. And when I say we, I mean Educate, and I think you all know, at least some of us. We are a group of researchers spun off of UCL at the end of last year. And at the base of our activity on the right is the golden triangle, which is the concept that ascertain the need to connect EdTech stakeholders such as researchers, educators, parents, and EdTech companies. In order to streamline the dialogue, in order to share evidence, in order for all of us to actually understand what are the challenges and the requirements. So we have set a goal to collect data as diversely as possible. That means from a wide as possible range of educational stakeholders. So policymakers, parents, educators, educational leaders, head teachers, that is, EdTech companies, etc., etc. But focus on just the groups in the what's that company, the gray in the middle, and in order to actually to consider as many voices and to build as inclusive evidence as possible. So as you can see, we have opted for what we call a T-shaped strategy of data collection and analysis, which essentially means that we are collecting data from few data sources, such as we have a number of surveys going on. Some of them are longitudinal and ongoing. Some of them are very anecdotal. We have a list of interviews. You can see on the right side of the slides the location of the interviewees that we have been talking to. We have harvested Twitter data, etc., etc. But again, we are trying to focus on widest possible research questions from various and more small cohorts, but then also to focus on a narrower subset of research questions, subset of educational stakeholders, subset of data sources. So to give us the opportunity to go deeper where we can. So while it is still an iteratively ongoing research, we are continually connecting new data, learning and refining all the time the research questions that we are asking and collecting data about. And in parallel, we are building our evidence base and some recommendations we are putting on top of that. Essentially, we wanted to understand how does learning look like being hit by COVID. What are the challenges and opportunities of the educational stakeholders? And you can see here on the slide just some selected quotes from our interviewees. But also we wanted to understand what are, what can we get out of it? What kind of transformation that the educational ecosystem, specifically here at the UK, is in need of, where COVID give us that opportunity. And not less important, how do we evaluate EdTech in that context? So since data collection is so important for EdTech companies, and we want them to know their target audience very well. So this figure here indicates on the right the percentage of respondents indicating the main opportunities that they saw resulting from the pandemic. So you would see an overwhelmingly majority indicated that they see the opportunity of improved use of technology for learning, and then following the opportunity to improve technical skills among teachers, following the opportunity of informal learning. And when we were looking into breaking into that data, you can see on the left side that state school stakeholders were more appreciative of opportunities of learners struggling with face-to-face learning and with technical upskilling of both learners and teachers. Also, you could see, for example, that primary school stakeholders were more appreciative than secondary school stakeholders about the opportunities for improved communication between parents and schools. And when we ask them, for example, about their main concern, you would see that the overall most concerning factor was the work-life balance, the commute that we are missing, maybe to some extent, followed by the concern of students falling behind. And we have devoted a full section in our report to speak about what it means, this narrative of falling behind. What is the implication of that narrative, and whether it's a constructive one. And then you can also see the third one was confusing messages and guidelines from the government, which we also devoted a section to, and looking into how that mixed messages from the government affected head teachers and their ability to operate under the already so uncertain environment. And interestingly, you would see that on average, the loss of income was the least of our respondents' concern. So that's encouraging or not. When looking deeper to discern the concerns of specific roles, you would see, well, you can see it here, but you would see in our report that teachers are the most concerned group about work-life balance from all the other groups. and understand them, the educational leaders, so head teacher are the most concerned group about confusing messages from the government, where parents were mostly concerned about emotional well-being and school parents communication, which also can be expected. When looking at different school types and school level, it is evident that the concerns about falling behind, the falling behind narrative, and the lack of technical know-how and poor infrastructure are much more stronger in state schools. We've seen that the falling behind concern was greater in secondary school than in primary school, which might, suggest that it is linked with the high-stakes assessment system in England, such as the GCSEs and A levels. Boredom and loneliness of students were much stronger emphasized as a concern in secondary and state schools, which might call for the emphasis of collaborative technologies, which I will mention later as one of the opportunities that we see for EdTech companies. And so also we have seen that, okay, we'll go back later to that point. So we wanted to use this various types of data sources to help us get some kind of triangulation. So just as an example, we harvested tweets from a pre-made list of hashtags that you can see on the right side. This is the list that we chose, more or less related to EdTech, again in the context of COVID, in the context of the school system. And we did two major harvests, one of them on the 18th of August, before the opening of the school year, the other one at October 2nd, after the opening of the school year. And you can see on the right what happened between the before and the after of the opening of the school year. And you can see, for example, that words such as find, support, get, online, new, free, they're all on the rise between the before and the after of the beginning of the school year, which might suggest some angle to what happened, what happened between and after. Okay, so essentially what we, overall, we have been able to identify 6 main research themes. And I will just tap very, very briefly on each of those. Again, we have an evidence base for each of them. The first one is remote emergency teaching. So as we all know, online learning is a research and practice field for over 25 years. There is already an abundance of literature and evidence to show how online learning can be done effectively. But the siloed structure of the English educational system has prevented it from diffusing into most schools, obviously. So as we all know, and this has brought us in March 2020 to a place where teachers had to transform very, very, very quickly into remote learning without having the actual infrastructure, pedagogy, knowledge, evidence to know how to do that effectively. And now we are, we are in December 2020, and after a rapid experimental period of a few months, we are still in most schools practicing what we call remote emergency teaching rather than effective online learning. Just as an example, one of the evidence that we are using is that approximately 60% of primary school students and more than 40% of secondary school students reported to not receive personalized feedback from their teachers during the lockdown at all. So that's just one aspect of the set of practices that could have been used and weren't used, and had major implication about attainment gap, about engagement, about well-being, and even eventually in the long term to how schools and educational stakeholders perceive online learning in the longer term as effective or not effective. The second theme was teachers' skilling development. And although there were many, many resources that were shared to support the delivery of learning by reputable organizations like, the OECD and UNESCO, the BBC, still studies show that, again, it's not a big surprise that there are still teachers out there that still are not supported to have the necessary technical or pedagogical skills to integrate digital technologies into the instruction. We are talking about teachers need to develop those teaching skills and to be able to critically evaluate any kind of evidence that is available about various EdTech tools and how they would serve their pedagogical needs. One of the main bright sides of the COVID was parental engagement. So that was a great opportunity, aside to a great challenge, because parents, of course, told us across the board about conflicting needs to support their children and also attend their professional responsibility, which was not and still is not a simple equation to solve. But the parent engagement was shown to be very much increased, which had again a very positive implications, and not just in the parents' ability to support the children, but also in the communication between parents and schools. This is one thing that we would be looking into, how to make sure that this opportunity will not be missed after everything is over. The fourth theme is the disproportionate disruption. Probably the most research area about COVID's implication on education is this increasing attainment gap between pupils. Even before COVID, we have a lot of evidence showing that education isn't being provided evenly or isn't being distributed evenly. And that disadvantaged community have less access to personal technology and high quality learning resources. I think COVID has shown us that this gap is widening, no doubt. We have schools with higher level of deprivation show greater decline. And we have special needs students that are being more and more excluded from the English educational system, sadly, and being prevented of support. The fifth theme was inconsistent infrastructure. So we were talking about the technical infrastructure first. So of course, again, it wasn't evenly distributed even before the lockdown, but now, when learning has been transformed to be remotely to some extent, there is, learning has been much more dependent on personal devices, internet access at the home, and the ability of parents to support financially and educational wise the student. So infrastructure is another widening gap, unfortunately. Another subject that we look at as infrastructure is school attendance. So in the UK, a lot of the assessment of students is based on physical attendance. And of course, COVID has been challenging that very much so. We have evidence of more and more students that are not able to attend schools regularly now, while at the same time the government is putting more and more focus on school attendance. That is another challenge that we are looking into. The sixth theme, the last one, which we called trust, and it is actually two dimensions or aspects of trust. One of them is online trust, so concerns about maintaining privacy while learning remotely, which is again an ongoing challenge, although we have 25 years of already knowledge on how to do it or how to approach this challenge from in online learning. The other aspect of trust is trust in the government. So the trust in the government is evidentially impaired by this ever-changing stream and inconsistent and difficult to implement guidelines. And on that issue, one of the things that we have done is that we have been collecting and still are collecting a growing timeline. We are currently almost at 150 different events of guidelines, messaging from the government that have caused and resulted confusion and mixed messaging and all kinds of clarity and all kinds of challenges for educational stakeholders. One of the things that we wanted to use our rich data for was to see if we can get to know better who are our educational stakeholders, other than just categorizing them to these are head teachers, these are teachers, these are parents, etc. But can we look at them and maybe put them into groups that are more a result of their behavior and what they told us? And we took a data set of 1,559 of our respondents. We excluded the EdTech providers, so that is the numbers that we were left with. And we used 3 groups of variables to cluster our survey responses. So we used support systems. So the support system they told us about, the main educational opportunities that you had a glance at some of them, and the main concern that they were facing or reported facing. And after clustering, we find these 5 clusters, and we called them aeronauts, earth movers, space seekers, water pilots, and fire terminers by the 5 forces of nature. And each one of them, we have been able to very clearly describe what are those, how we can characterize those specific this specific cluster. So just as an example, the aeronauts that you can see on the top right side of the slide, they recognize the value of technology, they feel very well supported, and they communicate very well with parents. Confident and optimistic about the use of technology in education, again, relatively to other clusters. They're eager to make progress and explore new ways of leveraging technology for teaching and learning. This group is very well aware of the poor infrastructure and technical skill limitation that may restrict their progress and tries to seek ways to overcome these potential stumbling blocks. They are also very concerned about children falling behind, again, relatively to other clusters. And the top most reported types of technologies that they use were synchronous live and recorded lessons, much more than other groups. Activities that are downloadable, so putting downloadable activities in the LMS, for example, and marking work submitted by student digitally. So these are the 3 areas where they used EdTech mostly. So this is just an example of the aeronauts, but for each of those clusters, we were then able to look at their description, how they manifest their behavior, and then to put in some recommendation to tailored, targeted support system programs for each of those clusters. Again, I will not go through it here. We have it in the report if anyone would be interested. One topic that I wanted to mention out of many others just before we would conclude this talk was the importance of communication, the importance of collaboration, the importance of communities, essentially, because it was a topic that were iterating again and again and again from so many perspectives. We know that teacher workload is an ongoing issue even before the pandemic. We know and we have evidence that many students reported feeling very alone and bored during the lockdown. And we have a lot of evidence on the high impact that collaboration using educational technologies can have in the educational ecosystem. And we have seen in the slide, I've put some findings that we have been seeing, like, for example, teachers, parents, and leaders who are reporting on being supported by the school leaderships, for example, statistically significantly showed higher positive feelings or more positive feelings than those who reported not being supported and enjoying remote and learning teaching. And we can see here evidence about confidence, enjoyment, and feeling, where people who were supported were much more positive about what they were doing. And we also see that the group that reported using educational collaborative technologies were significantly feeling better. Now, of course, this is not a causal relationship, and we need to be very, very careful about interpreting this, but it's still very significant link between support and collaboration and the way they were able to cope with all the challenges. And just as an example, school staff that felt that the school communication was very clear to them were 4 to 5 times more likely to feel confident about how their school handling the disruption and about what they are doing on the day-to-day. So I think that collaboration between the communities, but also within the communities, but also between the communities. So teachers communities, classroom communities, learning communities, head teacher communities, but also communities for teacher and parents to speak with EdTech companies, etc., are all, I think, very big opportunities for EdTech companies. So in the report, as I said, we put many recommendations, some of them, all of them evidence-based from the literature or from our evidence, some of them very, very pragmatic, some of them more high level. And maybe the one thing that I would want to mention here is, again, going back to this golden triangle. And I think the one thing that we've seen across the board that there is a need to come together to make technology adoption in education more sustainable, to use data and evidence in order to speak and converse with teachers, with parents, with the pupils, and EdTech companies, obviously from the other side, so that the EdTech companies would be able to study them, to understand what is that they need and how they are using the educational technology in the most effective way. So I will stop here. Yeah, you are all welcome to look at our preliminary version of the report that will be out very soon. And we have another cohort of our EdTech Accelerator coming up in the new year also. So look up for that as well. And I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Carmel. Thank you for sharing. When is the report going to be published?
We have a launch event, a roundtable on January 6th. It's already published, so we really be happy to have anyone that wants to engage in that conversation with us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I could see in the chat that Carla had some questions. Carla, would you mind asking them out loud? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, Carmel, I may have missed this, but when did you stop collecting the data? Because I'm very intrigued about the parents' kind of concern about income loss not featuring higher than it did.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
So first, we didn't stop collecting the data yet, but this specific evidence is from a survey that we stopped collecting when the school year began, so in September.
Okay, all right, because obviously the job situation is more acute now. Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why we will go back and collect that again. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, and that's more of an observation which I've seen, you know, sort of internationally as well, and also anecdotally is being kind of reported quite a lot, is that your kind of observations about secondary, I don't think are unique to the UK. They kind of resonate everywhere. And, you know, where families have limited devices, the first child who gets the device is the child in secondary education. But of course, we all know that actually it's the little ones who need the most support. Yet also in EdTech, you know, if you look at the kind of stats of EdTech companies, early years and primary, there's actually, or early primary at least, there's actually the littlest amount of EdTech being produced for them, sort of in many countries. So I just wondered if you've kind of come across more findings there, because that is actually going to become the biggest crisis, I think, in a couple of years' time, when we and you know, primary schools are reporting that the kind of little ones are finding it incredibly hard to kind of get back to normal in terms of, you know, attainment and not even catching up, but just, you know, concentration. All these kind of things are being reported as being quite tricky in primary schools and reception classes and stuff. So I just wondered if you had any kind of information on that as part of the research.
First, yes, we have evidence that the attainment gap is larger in younger children. That's totally correct. And also what you said about different countries around the world. So for example, we were speaking, part of our group works and study in Pakistan. So just as an example, we have seen communities that, you know, they wouldn't even have a desktop computer at home. They would just have smart devices, and of course not for every kid. So the whole EdTech ecosystem is, you know, it needs to, and to some extent does, being shaped by, you know, that reality, and, you know, the ability of the parents at the end of the day to be able to support that, not just technically, but also in terms of you know, they need to have very streamlined communication with the school in order to understand how to support their children. And the sad thing is that in those communities specifically, schools are left closed for longer times than, for example, comparing to here to the UK. So they are disconnected from the teachers, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of the lack of infrastructure and the lack of appropriate EdTech and the lack of support that the teachers would get in order to support. So it's, you know, it's an evil on evil on evil at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Carmel. And the next question is from Italo. Italo, are you here with us? Would you like to ask the question?
Yes, I'm here. I was just listening to the question that Carla had about the attainment gap, and you said that there is you see an attainment gap. I mean, of course, all the different things in different countries, we had different way of approaching the corona. So the schools in Sweden, they have not closed. They were open. Only the secondary schools were closed for a shorter period of time, and they're closed right now for the last few weeks in December. But I was thinking the attainment gap, it's interesting. Did you measure by testing actually knowledge or skills or competencies, or did you measure it by surveys? Both of you, Carmel and Carla.
Oh, sorry, Carmel, you go first.
Yeah. No, you go, Carla.
What I kind of raised, Italo, was more to do with, you know, sort of observational and self-reporting in schools, and also kind of in lots of newsletters and publications. I think the real measuring is starting, but I mean, to kind of get sort of real conclusive evidence from that is possibly a little bit too early. But certainly what teachers and head teachers are reporting is indicative of what's going on. And also the fact that we know that's, you know, and that's coming from a lot of countries in the world, that actually the secondary school child seems to take priority, and actually in a lot of countries even boys take priorities over girls, and you know, there needs to be more research on that for sure, and because a lot of sort of self-reporting and observations are being published, that, you know, people living this day to day. So I wouldn't say that the evidence is conclusive, but it's certainly very indicative. And I think we need to, you know, take note of it, because that's pretty worrying if that youngest layer of kids is being ignored.
Yeah, I can only say I can only agree with that. I mean, I see my two kids; they have lessons lying in bed. What can you get out of it?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, what Carmel said as well was at the very beginning, we are still in the remote emergency learning, not the online learning. And I'm curious, Carmel, seeing the trends and analyzing the situation, how do you think for how long we will call it the remote emergency learning rather than online learning?
That's an excellent question, because if you would ask me by March, when we saw remote emergency teaching, you know, overloading all of us in you know, very, very quickly, if you've asked that on March, I would say I'm sure that we, you know, by the summer we would be able to, you know, process lesson, and then the next school year would be completely different, because, you know, we would be able to put up the right support, etc., for teachers to actually use, you know, best practices that are already being used. You know, it's nothing new. It's there. We have it all, but unfortunately, that's very, very, very remote from the reality, and I think there is so much damage from that, because all of our focus on that attainment gap, and, you know, all of the focus on, you know, getting to the end of secondary school exams and end of school exams in general, etc., etc., has been just taking the resources from, you know, putting in place very effective way of learning and teaching and collaborating, and just focusing on, you know, okay, it doesn't really matter how we do it. It's just that we would continue in, you know, delivering knowledge to those kids' heads, and, you know, the results is just devastating. And we thought that, as someone mentioned here in the chat, we thought that it would be just the kids who took their summer exams on June, but no, it's this year's students as well that will take their exams, and the implication will go on for many years now. So unfortunately, we are not there yet.
Yeah, let's see where we will be next year, because we are very soon we will be approaching 1 year from the outbreak in Europe, and I'm also surprised that we haven't really stopped to think and to build some kind of strategy. I mean, on individual level, I'm sure it happened, especially in higher education. I know that many universities very quickly reacted, but then when we move to schools and K-12, I guess it's also very difficult on a school level to decide anything for so many children and so many teachers, and from one day to another to train everyone on how to use also technology, and how to provide all the children with devices, as you said, because it's not only a problem in Pakistan that there's one smart device for the whole household, for example. It's happening in Europe as well, in many cases, many countries.
Right.
That there is one laptop or two laptops, but both parents need to work, and there are 2 or 3 children in the house. So it's something that's well, we couldn't be ready for sure at that time. But
yeah, no, I agree, and I think if you look at the more individualized level, as you said, teachers have done remarkable work over the last few months. It's amazing how teachers alone were able to transform things. Really, really astonishing. But it's as you said, it's in the ecosystem level. As long as, you know, there is no real and meaningful connection between the government and the guidelines and how they support the head teachers and state schools, etc., etc. It will not diffuse. And my biggest fear is that, you know, a year from now, as you said, the pandemic will hopefully be over, and it would just become another flu, and you know, schools will go back to not know anything about online learning, and to think that remote learning, okay, we tested that, it didn't go well, let's go back to school. And we have evidence, we have evidence about teachers that were asked, if you had the chance to decide how you want to get back to school, most of them said, we want to go exactly as it was, to the physical face-to-face setting. And you know, we would just miss so many opportunities that the online learning could give us, and that's a really missed opportunity.
Absolutely, I totally agree that it's a very interesting point, Carmel, because yeah, the teachers are in this panic mode still, right? And trying to survive the pandemic and wait
Exactly.
over, instead of thinking forward and thinking, okay, how can I use all this experience? Because it's 1 year of experience in a very, very difficult environment that I could take with me and move forward. It's really interesting. I could see a question from Dina here as well. Dina, can I see you here? Are you with us? Yes, you are. Hi. Dina, would you mind asking the question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Carmel.
Hi, Dina.
So I noticed that we were talking, and I suppose it's really important just off the back of that comments we were just making, moving forward, this idea, it's very important teachers are able to critically evaluate EdTech that they're using, that's available in schools. Yet, interestingly, in the graphs you showed, it didn't really feature very highly as a challenge. And it just seems like there's a bit of a mismatch there, or a gap between what teachers' perceptions are and perhaps what the reality requires of them. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that's a gap that didn't start now. And, you know, it didn't originate from COVID or from the need to go to remote learning. It starts with, you know, with teacher educations. And, you know, we were doing some work with teachers along, and Alison can tell much more than I, to work with teachers about how to use evidence and to, you know, to critically evaluate educational technologies using evidence. And so that's a gap still not addressed because of this siloed structure between edtech companies and teachers. You know, regardless of COVID, edtech companies are still not in the place where they can show reliable evidence that their technology actually does what they're saying it should do. And you know, teachers still don't have the basic trust to use any kind of evidence just because they don't have the evidence available. So it's again about this discussion or this communication between edtech companies and schools, which should be supported by evidence. So I think what you're saying is really true. It's just because this dialogue is still not happening, and that's why teachers cannot really see yet what is the value in that.
Definitely, thank you, Carmel. And I wanted to focus on one more thing that you mentioned. I think it was the theme number 6, if I took a note correctly, as trust. And I remember one of my conversations with one of the startups that was just created as the response to that problem, that challenge, because very often we are being presented with a tool by our organization, which could be, you know, Microsoft Teams, for example, or Zoom, and we don't have much choice as educators to which tool to use. And also, in terms of the privacy, the huge companies normally, if they offer something for free, it's never for free, is it? It's always, we always pay with our data, and we always pay with the advertisements that later are tracking us. So do you have any thoughts on that? How could we escape from that pattern and start using maybe safer tools that are being created right now on the market?
Absolutely, that's a great point, and it's very well related to what Dina was talking about, because schools and teachers should have the ability and the, you know, the voice to go and ask EdTech companies, what kind of data are you collecting? What kind of data are you processing? How are you using my data that you are collecting or processing? What kind of data I can use, or what kind of data you would need to ask for consent from, you know, the parents, etc., etc. So right now it's a piece of dialogue that doesn't take place, or doesn't take place enough, because again, teachers are not yet in the place, or most teachers, some of them of course are, or maybe, you know, it's not just teachers, you know, it's IT personnel in schools, it's head teachers, it's the government to go and say, look, and you're right, there is a kind of embedded, I don't know if to call it a barrier, because it has also some merits, that we don't have any choice what stack to use. So my school is working with Microsoft, that's it. So you know, I'm using Teams, etc., etc. But we shouldn't take that for granted, and teachers should not take that for granted, and parents should not take that for granted. And that's again part of the dialogue that should be very, very transparent to them. Every kind of educational technology that is being offered to school should be accompanied by a very transparent communication of what does that technology do, what kind of evidence we have, and what are the data, if there is, what is the data that is being collected, how it's being used, how it is being stored, for how long, what kind of details, etc., etc. So that's exactly as Dina mentioned, that's part of the story that doesn't take place yet.
Absolutely, and it's not only about how the companies communicate what kind of data they collect and what they actually do with our data, but also for us to care enough to read this information, right? To ask this question. And when thinking about cost cutting, thinking that there are other costs than only money that we pay for.
Exactly, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Carmel. I can't see any more questions in the chat, so I'll just wrap up over here. Thank you for the presentation, and we are looking forward to see the report and to read the results. Please remember, everyone, 6th of January, pay attention to the Educate site. And
thank you. I'll put a link.
That would be great. Thanks so much for that. And also thank you everyone for being with us during this past 5 weeks.